And our gospel lesson this morning is taken from the gospel according to St. Matthew. Matthew chapter 4 and verses 12 through 23. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your life today in this reading from the gospel of Matthew. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And for those who sat in the region of the shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately, they left their nets, and they followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called to them. Immediately, they left their boats and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Well, if you were here last week, you'll notice that here in Matthew, we get a very different take on the call of those first disciples from what we got in John last week. Here we have the more traditional view of Jesus turning up on the beaches where they're working and living their lives, spending their days. And then one of those things that always amazed me in Sunday school as a child, Jesus calls them and they just get up and they just go. And some of them leave their dad in the boat, and they just go. He said, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And what kind of appeal that held for anyone, I'm not really sure. Okay, I'm going to go fish for people. I've heard some pretty bad pickup lines in my time. Never used on me. Usually to be used with strangers in an attempt to get a date. Do you believe in love at first sight, or should I walk past again? No, not funny. Look, your hand looks heavy. Can I hold it for you? I seem to have lost my number. Can I get yours? And while I'm not aware of any pickup lines to be used with potential disciples, I don't think this is the way I would go. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. I would hardly abandon my career and my livelihood in order to follow someone who bid me fish for people. These would be disciples. They're out there casting their nets as they do every day of their lives, not knowing that Jesus too is casting a net. I wonder if he didn't call some people on that day on the beach who said, "Nothing doing, we don't know who you are, follow you where? Fish for people? You're crazy." But those to whom that call really sounded an echo in their spirits, they could not escape it. It spoke to something deep inside of them, perhaps the deepest things. They'd been casting that net on their beaches of their lives for probably years. But also, there was another net that was being cast for them. They'd been waiting all their lives to hear that call, to get caught up in their moment in history. What could they do but leave their boats and their nets and follow? When the call came and they knew it to be their call, what could they do but follow? Roger Nishioka describes growing up in a Presbyterian manse. If you don't remember, a manse is like the house that a church used to provide for its pastor, except a lot of churches don't do it anymore. He grew up in the 70s and 80s like myself, and his father was a pastor, of course. And unlike many families back in those days, they did not watch television at the table, for many of us did. Except on Sundays. That was the one day of the week when they broke their rule and they watched Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Because you had to watch things when they came on back then. And it came on Sundays in the afternoon. If you are a child of Generation X or even older, then you definitely have watched Wild Kingdom on Sundays with your host, Marlin Perkins. It was on from 1963 to 1988, and they still have a website on the internet. If you are not a child of Generation X or older, let me explain. Back in the days before Animal Planet, once a week for half an hour, you got a documentary called Wild Kingdom, sponsored by Mutual of Omaha Insurance Company. Back in the days when the earth was young and the unicorns roamed, it was immensely popular to watch Wild Kingdom on Sunday afternoons. Nishioka says that for his father, who was a pastor, each episode was a theological journey into the wonders of God's world and the beauty of God's imagination. The savannas, the plains, the jungles, the forests, the deserts, the oceans. All of these hosted a vast array of life and so many different ways of being and living in God's world. And of course, as I said, back then you had to watch the show when it aired. And it aired on Sundays, and so they watched TV at the table on Sundays. Nishioka remembers one episode particularly well about the elephant seals, the seals, in Argentina. And of course, as they often did in these shows, they would focus on a particular mother and the baby seal that she had just given birth to. And after giving birth, the mother would leave her pup on shore and go into the water to feed because she was very hungry. And hordes of new mothers did the same thing at the same time. They gave birth, they left their babies alone on the shore, they dived into the waters, they ate for half an hour or so, and then they came back expecting to find the right baby. How do you do it? They all came back at pretty much the same time, barking and squealing and looking for their babies. And the camera somehow followed the same mother as she came back to a different part of the beach and looked for the baby that she had left there. How would she ever find it? How would it ever find her? The beach was crowded and full of barking seals, both adult and child. But by following each other's voices and scents, their odors, they were soon reunited across a crowded beach. And the host, Marlin Perkins, if you don't remember his voice, it was marvelous. He should have been a preacher. The host, Marlin Perkins, explained that from the moment of birth, the sound and the scent of the pup is imprinted on the mother's memory. And the sound and the sense of the mother is imprinted on the pup's memory. And they could not lose each other forever because of that. And Nishioka's father turned to his children and said, "That is how it is with God. We are imprinted with a memory of God. And God is imprinted with a memory of each one of us. We belong together, and even if it takes a lifetime, we will always find our way back to each other." That story caused me to think that as pastors go, I need to start saying cooler stuff to my kids. I need to up my Yoda game and sound a little wiser than I often do. More than that, though, consider the times in your life, maybe 2, maybe 3, when something or someone altogether new seemingly showed up, but in that person or in that thing you felt a sense of home, a sense of belonging, a sense of rightness, although it was new to you, as if you'd suddenly found a piece of yourself that you'd lost. I mean, have you ever wondered why Andrew and Peter and James and John just up and traipse after Jesus, a complete stranger, when he turns up on the beaches of their lives and says to them, "Follow me"? They left behind their careers, their livelihoods, their aging parents, maybe even their families, for it says in the book of Mark that Peter had a mother-in-law. They heed the command to follow Jesus without checking his references, without asking him, "Where are we going?" Which would be my first question. They go with him as if they had been waiting for his call all their lives, as if they somehow knew his voice, as if they heard in Christ's summons the sound of home. Home, calling them back to itself. They recognize something in Jesus' his voice, his eyes, his urgency, the way he peered into their souls. I don't know. They recognized something in Jesus that they had been waiting for without knowing it, longing for, but somehow expecting. Like seal pups hearing their mother's voice on the beach. What could they do but rise up and follow? And sometimes a call comes into our lives. And what can we do but rise up and follow? We hear it, and that's all we can do. Now, just briefly, I want to say, don't feel threatened by the vastly different accounts that we get in John and Matthew of how those disciples were called. Last week, we read a very different narrative of the same call, of the same people in John. But remember that these narratives were all written decades after the actual event by different authors with different audiences and different emphases. They all had their own sources, too. The point is not how Jesus called those disciples so long ago. It's that Jesus does call disciples still today. And how will we know his call when we hear it? When the new thing turns up on the beaches of our lives, how will we know that it is a call to us that is divine and not just one of the many other seals barking on the beach? I dare say that we will know it because it will bear an echo of home in our hearts, that sacred imprint by which a mother seal calls her pup to herself. But also, I think the key is in the last verse here, the last verse of this passage, which brings it all together. It says, Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. If the call is urging us toward the healing of our world, if the call is urging us to use our unique giftedness for the healing of God's world, I think we can usually be pretty sure that it's the real thing. Whether urging us to use our giftedness in the field of religion or art or hospitality or administration or what have you, if the call is to use your unique giftedness for the healing of this world, and if it bears echoes of home, if it sounds right, then you can be pretty sure that it's your mother seal. Trust the voice that sounds like home. I think you'll recognize it above the chaos and the din of our life. Richard Rohr wisely points out that Jesus' goal in all four of the Gospels was not to punish people, but to heal them. Not to punish people, but to heal them. Perhaps you are being called to some new venture of healing out there in the world. I mean, come on. We waste a lot of time casting our nets into the waters of this world. For one thing, we lose a lot of our life's numbered hours just scrolling through social media and through Google. The internet is appropriately named, for it is a net that scoops us up. And it takes hours and hours and hours of our lives. It catches us. You know the word scroll? The word scroll thought its days were up. The word scroll thought it was finished when the printing press came along and gave us books. And then Scroll's agent calls and says, "Scroll, you're not going to believe it. I've got iPhone on the phone, and they want to use you, but they want you to be a verb. Is that okay? Because it's a pretty big acting gig. And now scrolling. It's something we spend hours of our lives doing. We just cast our nets in search of this thing or that, usually not knowing as we're scrolling what it is that we're looking for. Usually just trying to pass the spare moments of boredom rather than being silent with our thoughts. We're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or what else do you have out there? Twitter, TikTok. I think that's about my limit. Pinterest, YouTube, Reddit. We don't usually know what we're looking for. We're just kind of looking. We'll know it when we see it, but we never see it. We just keep scrolling. It's not out there on social media, perhaps. We're not looking for life's purpose out there, but if it turned up, we'd be willing to entertain a conversation, I imagine. In our lives, we're forever casting our nets just to see what turns up, or as my father used to say, run it up the flagpole and see who salutes. Some of it sticks and some of it doesn't. I mean, think of all the false starts that we have in our lives. Think of all the stalled friendships, relationships that just kind of petered out. They ended up not going anywhere. They never reached fruition, as if a cold snap came late in the year and killed off all the blossoms. Think of all the gear that you've got at home, the helmets and the poles and the balls that sit untouched, representing hobbies that you thought would just catch you up in them like a net, but just they didn't. Didn't do it for you. What evidence is there of your New Year's resolutions? I mean, really, come on. For many people, maybe there's a rowing machine or an elliptical machine in the garage sitting waiting to be touched. Think of all the books that we abandoned after just 4 chapters. They just couldn't hold us. Or the apps that we downloaded onto our phones thinking that they would be useful and then they weren't. Or the photos that we took of something that we wanted to remember, but we've never gone back and looked at that photo. Because we didn't realize when we took it that a phone, as wonderful as it is, cannot capture that moment in time. That moment passes. It passes. We could only get to the one we're in because it came. But to save it in a jar, we can't do it. Is that what we're trying to do when we scroll through all this stuff, casting about, looking for things we could never name? Are we trying to save our lives in a jar, keep them preserved forever? Or are we trying to avoid the fact that we can't keep them preserved forever? We're not eternal. I don't know. There's no end to scrolling. There's no end to casting our nets. There's no end to looking for something. We never quite stop doing it. We wander down some lane, whether it be a mental lane or a spiritual lane or a real geographical lane. And that lane leads us to another, and way leads to way. It's like driving down an old, unfamiliar country road, seeing where it'll take us. At no point do you reach the sign that says, the end. You have seen the world. You're good. There's nothing more. This is the end right here. For everything we see and do opens us to yet more things that we can see and do, even if they're things that look pretty much like things we've already seen and done. We cast our small nets. We know not what we're looking for most of the time, and we little imagine that all the while we're busy casting our nets, there is a bigger net that is seeking us, one that will take us and hold us. That a larger net is being cast, one that will catch us, and in whose bondage we are most free, and in whose holding is the embrace that we never even knew we were looking for. Follow me. Follow me. What if those 4 disciples, Andrew, Peter, James, and John, had been out in their boats when Jesus turned up on the beach? What if they had been in town for their lunch break, checking out the new bistro? What if they decided to catch a matinee and leave old Zebedee out there fishing by himself for the day, which they ended up doing anyway? If Jesus had not found them on the beach that day, Would he have come back a better time? Or would he have called some other disciples to himself, thus changing the course of human history? And St. Peter's in Rome would have to be called Saint Innocent. Maybe, I don't know. But somehow I think not. Somehow I think that moment had to be. Maybe sooner, maybe later, but without fail. The call had to come into those 4 lives. And in that call, they would hear an echo of a half-remembered home, and it would be compelling to them. And then they would get up and follow. It could be no other way. It was the moment that they were born to. The one they kind of always knew was coming. And what can ever separate us from the love for which we're destined and created? Whose sound and accent, whose scent are imprinted on us from birth. They didn't even know what they were looking for as they cast their nets that morning. They didn't know they were looking for this. But their nets turned up something unexpected that day, something precious, even as they themselves were being caught in a bigger net from which they would never escape. And so it is with you and with me. We don't always know how we got to where we got in life. I mean, honestly, how do we get where we are? We sometimes wonder if it's any place worth being. And in moments of despair or worry, we might look around and wonder, did I take a wrong turn back there at that juncture that I recall? All the missed opportunities, all the time and energy seemingly wasted on things that didn't end up working out. Things that just weren't for us, maybe. And yet, in our better moments when we look back over the years of our lives, we can see traces of a bigger net, something that has been holding us in its embrace. We can see clearly that while we were blundering our way through this life full of years, we were also being led. We were also being drawn. We were also being held. We were also being called to something bigger and greater than ourselves. And into these lives that can seem so mundane, into these busy lives that can seem so devoid of adventure and big things like purpose and truth, into these very lives where we cast our daily nets, we hear an old familiar voice that we don't know if we've heard before. And we catch a whiff of a familiar place that could smell like home, and we know that it is. And it bids us follow. How many callings do you get in a lifetime? How many times does Christ turn up on the beach and tell you, leave what you're doing, follow me? And how do you distinguish your mother's voice from that of all the other seals on the beach? How do we know that it's her calling us to herself? Well, to mix a metaphor, as Jesus said in John, my sheep know my voice. I mean, imagine this. Imagine that somebody comes to you telling you that they're hearing voices. Those voices are telling them to harm themselves. And they believe those voices are from God. What would you say? You probably know already what you would say to that person. If that voice is telling you to harm you, then it's not God. It's not God. You probably know exactly what you would say in a case like that. Anyone who has ever heard God speaking into the quiet moments of their life will probably say, I believe you that you're hearing something, but you need to believe me that what you're hearing is not God. God does not speak punishment and fear. God does not speak pain and destruction. God does not tell us to harm ourselves or anybody else. God's voice, when we hear it, speaks of welcome and blessing and peace. It speaks of sacrifice, yes, but not harm. God's voice speaks of love, and when you hear it, you will know it. It sounds like home. Maybe the home you never quite had, but which you always knew was there somewhere waiting for you. God speaks healing. That's why resurrection is our symbol. God speaks healing. And that's why the last verse in this passage is what brings it all together. After those 4 fishermen left everything and followed Jesus, it says, Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. If it causes you to seek good news and to speak good news, if it causes you to participate in the healing of a broken world, then you might be pretty sure that it is God's calling and God's voice to you. Calling you not just to personal redemption, but to the redeeming of the world. That's the twofold echo of God's voice on the beaches of our lives. Does it speak love? And does it speak healing? All other voices are false, especially if they're claiming to speak for God, but in fact their message is judgment or intolerance or greed. Maybe today or maybe someday down the road you'll be surprised by a voice that you'll almost recognize, maybe even one that you've been waiting for without knowing it. Maybe it will call you to leave something that you don't want to leave and urge you to follow you know not exactly where. If ever this happens, the two questions are these. Does it speak a love that my spirit recognizes as its home? And does it call me to use my unique giftedness for the healing of the world? Love and healing. And if it does, you can be pretty sure that that's the mother seal's voice. God grant us the courage when that hour comes to get up and to follow. Amen.